The Christian Girl and Her Muslim Apostate Lover. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim apostate girl in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 52. The arrival of the controversial female author at the Hague International Airport. In the beginning, Dr. Kamal stood firmly against the idea that his fiancée Ibtihal should go to Europe and attend the trial in person. He is concerned that her trip to Europe may expose her to a possible terrorist attack. He suggested that she should allow him to go instead of her. Even so, the brave Muslim apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal insisted on attending the trial because she believes that she may be required by her legal representatives or the International Criminal Court, ICC, to explain some unclear issues in the charges that have been directed against the Quran and Hadiths. When he reluctantly gave in to her demand, the controversial female author requested her apostate lover to stay behind and take care of the Muslim liberation movement's affairs. Shortly after her engagement, the lovely fiancée Ibtihal flew to the Netherlands. The media had already announced in advance the day of her arrival at the Hague International Airport. Therefore, everybody came to know about her arrival, the date of the trial, and what the trial is all about. She has been received with tight security. At the international airport, thousands of Muslims gathered to protest and condemn her by name and shout their protests against her anti-Islamic movement and controversial speeches and provocative books. The Sudanese Muslim refugees in the Netherlands came to the Hague International Airport to condemn her too. They brought with them a huge caricature of the so-called despicable Sudanese apostate woman Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin and burned it in front of the airport. While they were doing that, they chanted many disgraceful phrases in the Arabic language against the so-called accursed Sudanese apostate woman. They are carrying placards in which have been written in big Arabic letters that Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin is a shame and disgrace to the bright name of Sudan. Some of them openly insulted her and threatened to kill her and burn her body into ashes. Consequently, the Dutch police authority used tear gas to disperse the angry Sudanese refugees. Some of them have been arrested and dragged as criminals to the lockup. Most of those detained Sudanese are members of the notorious Muslim Brotherhood terrorist group. While Dr. Ibtihal is coming out of the arrival hall surrounded by some police officers, suddenly a young Arab Muslim woman who is wearing Islamic clothes tried to attack her. The young woman is holding a small bottle filled with black-colored liquid. When her eyes have seen the female enemy number 1 of Islam coming toward her, the burqa-clad girl has swiftly forced her way through some police officers and threw the liquid at the face of the controversial female author who wrote controversial anti-Islamic books against the so-called religion of peace and the master of creation who was sent by Allah as a mercy to mankind. Fortunately, the hated controversial female author responded quickly, jumped backward, and avoided the substance which the black burqa girl has thrown at her face. Instead of her, the liquid has been sprinkled on the face of an adjacent person. That person held her face with both hands and began to scream loudly from the terrible pain that the burning liquid has caused. The victim happened to be a young Dutch female police officer. The assailant girl has been arrested at once and dragged from the scene of the crime. It turned out that the young Muslim girl was carrying a bottle of burning caustic substance. She wanted to disfigure the face of Ibtihal with that burning acid. The burning acid was supposed to erase her nose, blind her eyes, seal her mouth, and disfigure her completely. She wanted to mutilate her so that she could never ever able to speak or write any blasphemies against the Holy Quran and the Master of Creation, the infallible Prophet Muhammad. Instead, she destroyed the life of a young policewoman, disfigured her face, and completely blinded her eyes forever. After that horrifying terrorist attack, the Sudanese apostate woman Ibtihal had been taken quickly out of the international airport and driven in an unmarked police car. She spent her first night in a hotel outside the city of Hague. Her place of stay was kept secret, and no media person was informed about it. The historical trial is scheduled to take place on the following day after her arrival. On the next day morning, Dr. Ibtihal is transferred from her hotel to the International Criminal Court by the police authority in a ghost police vehicle. Chapter 53. The Trial of the Quran and Hadiths at the ICC in Hague. The International Criminal Court in the Netherlands is not like other courts in the world. It has different rules and regulations that make it unique. Most of the proceedings of the court are not open to the public. People can have access to those proceedings on the website of the International Criminal Court after the trial is conducted and a fair decision has been reached. Only the two disputing parties and their legal representatives are allowed inside the courtroom. Most of its cases are conducted without the presence of the suspects. For instance, the recently ousted president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, was indicted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide in his absence. An arrest warrant for President Omar al-Bashir was issued on March 4, 2009, by the International Criminal Court, indicted him on 5 accounts of crimes against humanity: murder, extermination, forcible transfer, torture, and rape, and 2 accounts of war crimes, pillaging, and intentionally directing attacks against civilians. A second arrest warrant for President al-Bashir was later issued on July 12, 2010, by the International Criminal Court, adding 3 counts of genocide for the ethnic cleansing of the Fur, Masalit, and Zaghawa tribes of the Darfur region in western Sudan. Until today, September 2, 2024, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood and former president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, remains at large, wanted by the International Criminal Court. At present, he is in prison in Khartoum and facing multiple trials for his uncountable hideous crimes which he committed against his own Sudanese people. Although the current secular government promised to hand him over to the ICC, it is doubtful it would do so. This is because the new government is still controlled by the Janjaweed, who were used by al-Bashir to carry out their hideous crimes in Darfur. Today, they are called the Rapid Support Forces, but changing their name is just like snakes discarding their clothes, but still, they are poisonous and deadly Muslim terrorists. Their leader knew he would shoot himself in the foot if he agreed for al-Bashir to be handed to the ICC. He knew and understood that al-Bashir would drag him and his Rapid Support Forces in his crimes because they are those notorious Muslim terrorists who used to be known as the Janjaweed, who took part in those hideous crimes in the Darfur region. At any rate, besides the local police, the International Criminal Court of Justice has its own police. The local police of Hague are not allowed inside the courtroom. Therefore, the Dutch police accompanied the female complainer Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin to the doorsteps of the International Criminal Court and retreated. The female founder of the Muslims Liberation Movement entered the courtroom surrounded by 2 international policemen and 1 policewoman. She has been immediately directed to where her legal representatives are sitting. On the opposite side, Dr. Ibtihal saw a group of people whom she knew they are Egyptians. From their long beards and Islamic clothes, she understood those are the legal representatives of the Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University. They are 13 in number, and all are males. Then Dr. Ibtihal saw a group of lawmen whom she guessed they are the judge and jury of the ICC. Among the jury, there are 2 women. As soon as she entered the courtroom, the trial proceedings began. The first group of lawyers who are given permission to speak is the 7 legal representatives of the Muslims Liberation Movement. There is no individual spokesman for the group. While the 7 are sitting together, they began to present the charges one after another. Each one is assigned some charges against Islam to deliver. As soon as the first speaker finished, the second took over. All those verses of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad are marked as the licenses for the Muslim mujahideen to invade a country of the so-called unclean infidels and slaughter its inhabitants if they refuse to embrace Islam, possess their lands, rape their women, enslave their children, and confiscate their wealth, cattle, and properties have been pinpointed out. The legal representatives mentioned many verses of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet of Islam, which are the main causes behind creating Islamic terrorism all over the world today. After presenting the charges against the two main sacred texts of Islam, the legal representatives read the three reports that covered the crimes committed against humanity during the Islamic caliphates and empires. The first report covered the period of the Prophet Muhammad and his four successors, who are known as the rightly guided caliphs, Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman, and Ali. The second report summarized the atrocities committed by the Muslim mujahideen during the period of the main four succeeding Islamic caliphates of the Umayyad, Abbasid, Fatimid, and the Mughal reigns under the brutal evil Muslim leader who ever existed in human history, Tamerlane, and Emperor Akbar in India, and the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. The third report covered the modern Islamic terrorist groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, Taliban of Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda of Osama bin Laden, the Islamic Caliphate of Syria and Iraq, Al-Qansah Brigade of ISIS, Boko Haram of Nigeria, Hezbollah of Lebanon, Hamas of Palestine, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades in Israel, Houthi rebels also called Ansar Allah of Yemen, Al-Shabaab of Somalia, Janjaweed of Sudan, and their hideous crimes which they committed and continue to commit against humanity all over the world. The Al-Qansah Brigade is the women police or the female religious enforcement officers unit of the self-proclaimed Muslim Mujahideen, which is the resurrection of the Islamic State of the Levant, ISIS female branch, that mainly operates in its de facto capital of Raqqa in Syria. In fact, there are 86 Islamic terrorist groups in the world, but those above mentioned are the nastiest and evilest. The legal team of 7 members has supplied enough evidence to prove that the current Islamic terrorist groups are basing and justifying their crimes against humanity on the teachings of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. It took the legal representatives of the Muslims Liberation Movement 4 hours to present the charges against the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet of Islam. After that, the legal representatives of Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University have been invited to present their line of defense. The first legal representative began his defense by counterattacking the Jewish and Christian religious texts of the Old Testament and the New Testament, which he called the Torah of Moses, the Zabur or the Psalms of David, and the Injil or the Gospel of Jesus the son of Maryam. The International Criminal Court tried to forbid him from dragging the Bible into the trial. He has been, time and again, reminded to stop talking about the Bible, but he refused to listen and continued to attack the Jewish scriptures. Finally, when the court realized that the Egyptian legal representative is pig-headed and determined to talk about the religious scriptures of the Jews and Christians, he has been disqualified and ordered to vacate the courtroom. He refused to leave until he has been physically ejected from his seat and tossed out of the ICC courtroom. Actually, the stiff-necked Egyptian religious representative had been literally dragged out of the courtroom by 2 Interpol policemen and cast out. The other 12 legal representatives of the Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University objected to the decision of the judge and demanded that their colleague must be allowed to re-enter the courtroom and continue his defense. They threatened to withdraw and consider the court's decision unfair and biased if their demand is not fulfilled. The judge refused to yield to their threats and pressures and asked them to continue without the expelled lawyer. The 12 representatives of the Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University have put their heads together and conducted a quick private discussion in whispers. At the end of that discussion, 10 of them left the courtroom and 2 remained behind. Those 2 legal representatives tried desperately to convince the court that Islam was intended to be the religion of peace, love, and tolerance from the beginning, but the hostile pagan tribes of Arabia and the Jews of Medina and Khaybar cities at the time of the Prophet Muhammad compelled him to forsake his peaceful approach and to resort to a violent approach. This change from a peaceful approach to a violent approach happened after the Messenger of Allah and his few followers immigrated from Mecca city to Yathrib city. The tricky question that those 2 Muslim scholars could not answer satisfactorily is whether the Medina verses, which taught a violent approach, abrogated the Meccan verses, which taught a peaceful approach. They both admitted that the Meccan verses had been abrogated by the Medina verses. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, they said, no human being has the power to reverse that order of abrogation. In addition, they admitted the charges that the Quran and Hadiths ordered the killing of those who rejected the message of the final messenger of Allah to the world, the Prophet Muhammad, who was sent as a mercy to mankind. They also claimed that all Muslim men of the world are divinely and eternally ordered by Allah and His Prophet to invade other non-Muslim nations and convert them to Islam by the sword. They have to spread the light of Islam all over the earth. If any infidel tried to stop them, they have been authorized by the Holy Quran and Hadiths of the Prophet to kill that person and inherit whatever he left behind him. According to them, this divine order would remain a universal duty and eternal obligation to all faithful followers of Islam. In accordance, the International Criminal Court has based its final decision on the charges of the Muslims' liberation movement and the defense of the Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University. The decision of the court came in favor of the Muslims' liberation movement. The International Criminal Court ruled that all the charges are valid. Therefore, the Islamic religious texts of the Quran and Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad included verses and sentences that order and encourage crimes against humanity. There is quite several historical evidence to support the charges of the Muslims' liberation movement. The legal representatives of the Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University have openly and frankly and honestly admitted that those verses and hadiths of the Medina city, the main two texts of Islam, the Quran and the hadiths of Muhammad, represent the final message of Islam, and no mortal human being has the divine authority to reverse the order or nullify it. Eventually, based on the proceedings of the trial, the International Criminal Court ruled that the Quran and Hadiths are not appropriate religious texts, and hence the court encourages every civilized nation and Muslim country to place those two books on their prohibited list of dangerous writings. The court also ruled that Muslims all over the globe must be advised not to teach their children those terror-inspiring religious books. Those dangerous writings have a high potentiality of producing religious terrorists and dangerous offenders. Accordingly, the ICC recommended every private Muslim school in the West should either be shut down or otherwise must be secularized. Moreover, all schools in the Muslim world must be advised not to include Islam as a daily religious material of learning in their curriculums. In a nutshell, the ICC has ruled that Islamic texts, the Quran, and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad must never be taught to Muslim students in schools all over the world. These Islamic religious texts can produce dangerous Muslim terrorists who love to blow up their bodies in smithereens and kill many innocent people. They fill the minds of the Muslim students with false promise of reward of virgins in paradise and rivers of wine. Therefore, the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad are as deadly in the minds of Muslim students as rabies in the brains of dogs. Chapter 54. Dr. Ibtihal at the doorsteps of the ICC in the Netherlands. The victorious controversial female author Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin stood on her feet and clapped her hands when the International Criminal Court finished delivering its final verdict. For the first time since she began her Muslims' liberation movement, she felt the world is supporting her noble cause. She also understood that Muslims will respond violently to the decision of the International Criminal Court. Experience taught the Muslim apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal that whenever Muslims get angry because of something not favoring them, such as writings, speeches, drawings, or decisions, they always try to relieve their anger on the Christians who are living among them. In that case, every Christian in the Middle East and North Africa can become the scapegoat. The pagan Christian men will be brutally killed, their so-called infidel women are raped, and their churches, stores, and houses get looted, burned, and destroyed. Notwithstanding, Dr. Ibtihal became extremely happy after the International Criminal Court in Hague has accepted her charges against the Quran of Muslims and the Hadiths of the alleged Prophet of God Muhammad and ruled in her favor. Therefore, the terribly persecuted Muslim apostate girl wants to fly out of the courtroom and phone her lover and fiancé, the Sudanese apostate man Dr. Kamal, and break the glad news to him. She wants him to be the first one in the world to know that the International Criminal Court condemned the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad as dangerous writings that have a high potential to produce religious terrorists and dangerous offenders. The victorious Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal has emerged out of the courtroom while she is almost flying. She found over 50 Dutch police officers surrounding the courtroom. She is surprised to see so many police officers. She stood on the doorsteps of the International Criminal Court and waited for some explanation. Two Dutch policewomen approached her. One of them pointed to her the police car that is waiting to take her to her hotel. When Dr. Ibtihal began to descend the steps of the court, the Dutch police formed 2 rows of human beings shielding her from any possible terrorist attack. Dr. Ibtihal guessed that the Dutch police authority most probably received some information that some Islamic terrorists are planning to assassinate her at the International Criminal Court. While the victorious controversial female author is coming down on the steps, she saw one of the Dutch police officers suddenly sprung out of the left row and opened fire on her. He fired 3 bullets from a point-blank range. 2 bullets have hit Dr. Ibtihal in her chest and 1 bullet in her head. The other Dutch cops responded quickly and shot many bullets at the assaulting police officer. Dr. Ibtihal fell, and her body rolled down all the way until it landed at the bottom of the steps. Following the gunshots, there is great confusion ensued among the rest of the police officers. On that fateful day, the Dutch police are prepared to confront any imminent terrorist attack, except an attack from within. That is the last thing any police officer would expect to occur. Therefore, the police officers began to run on each other and in all directions, and some fell down and trodden under feet. It took them around 20 minutes to control themselves and face the critical situation. Shortly after, over 50 fleets of police cars arrived at the crime scene. They are followed by many fire trucks and ambulances. All the roads leading to the International Criminal Court building have been closed. The courtroom has also been shut from within when the sounds of those gunshots are heard. As a matter of fact, no one left the courtroom except the female complainer Dr. Ibtihal. The court police ordered everyone to remain inside the courtroom. Some of the Dutch police officers have overcome their shock, rushed to the lifeless body of the slain girl, took it to an ambulance, and rushed it to the nearest hospital. Other officers took the body of the assassin and took it to another ambulance and headed to the hospital too. Chapter 55. Reactions to the decision of the ICC on the Quran and Hadiths. Just 20 minutes before the trial of the Quran and Hadiths at the ICC had ended, the Dutch police intercepted a phone conversation between 2 suspected Muslim terrorists. The conversation was in the Persian language. Therefore, the police could not understand the entire conversation, but a few words indicated that something is going to happen at the International Criminal Court. The Muslim terrorists mentioned while they were speaking in Persian a few English phrases such as the International Criminal Court, the Dutch police, and $50 million. The Dutch police authority had not had enough time to find a Persian interpreter to translate the entire conversation. Based on those few English phrases, the Dutch police concluded that some Islamic terrorists or Italian mafia gangsters are plotting to assassinate the female controversial author who authored some provocative anti-Islamic books. Such a murder plot is going to take place at the International Criminal Court, and then the assassins get $50 million from the Iranian government. To foil such a terrorist plot, the Dutch police authority sent many police officers to guard the main exit of the International Court and to ensure the safety of the Sudanese woman Dr. Ibtihal. The Dutch police managed in a few minutes to deploy enough police officers to guard the main streets that lead to the building of the International Court. Over 50 police officers surrounded the main entrance of the court. Other police officers were busy clearing the streets from suspicious cars and pedestrians. While those quick steps were going on, Dr. Ibtihal emerged while she was rushing in full speed out of the courtroom. 2 female police officers received her and tried to rush her to the police car that was made ready to take her to her hotel. At that moment, one of the unsuspected Dutch police officers executed the assassination plot instead of the Muslim terrorists or mafia gangsters. The other Dutch police officers were in shock when the slayer was identified as a Dutch police officer who has no connection with any terrorist groups. More than that, the murderer was born to a Protestant Methodist Christian family. The first news that came from the hospital, the assassin had succumbed to his wounds and died. He died without revealing any information about his motive for murdering the female founder of the Muslims Liberation Movement who authored some anti-Islamic books. The Dutch police authority ruled out any monetary gain as the motive. Therefore, the motive of the assassination remained a mystery for the police department. As soon as the Persian phone conversation had been interpreted, It appeared that one of the Iranian terrorists informed another terrorist that the despicable, blasphemous Sudanese woman is going to be killed at the International Criminal Court by a Dutch policeman. The would-be killer had already received $50 million. The translated conversation solved part of the mystery and left the other part unexplained. The Dutch police authority inquired about the bank account of the assassin. His bank balance does not exceed $5,000. In the meantime, the BBC World News is the first international news agency to announce that one of the Dutch police officers has assassinated the female controversial author Dr. Ibtihol at the doorsteps of the ICC in the Netherlands. The British Broadcasting Corporation agency repeated the same information the local Hague TV announced. Furthermore, the BBC is the first agency to announce the decision of the International Criminal Court. The British news agency has considered the decision of the International Criminal Court is going to be the most controversial breaking news ever happens in our modern time. It announced that the International Criminal Court accepted the charges of the Muslims' liberation movement and condemned the main Islamic sacred texts, the Holy Quran, and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, as unsuitable books for the upbringing of Muslim children and inappropriate materials for moral guidance. Because of its decision, the International Criminal Court advised all civilized countries and nations to place the Quran of Muslims and the books of the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad on the prohibited list of dangerous books. Al Jazeera Satellite TV and American CNN picked up the breaking news and announced them too. In the meantime, those world news agencies considered the assassination of the female author Dr. Ibtihol just a side issue and concentrated on the astonishing International Criminal Court decision. No one in the entire world had predicted such a daring verdict against the main sacred texts of Islam, the Quran and Hadiths. Therefore, it is shocking news to everyone who heard it. As could be anticipated, the decision of the International Criminal Court has been met with violent reactions in Muslim countries. In the Western world, the decision has been received with mixed responses. Some critics said that such an intolerable decision is going to take the world to the time of the Crusaders, the Spanish Inquisition, and the Dark Ages in Europe. Some considered it inapplicable, and it may lead to the increase of the Islamic militants and terrorist attacks in the world. Those critics prophesied that no country is going to follow the advice of the International Criminal Court. A very few critics considered the decision to be a bold step that must be given a try by the civilized Western countries. In the Muslim world, Christians as usual have been made to pay the price for the unbearable decision of the International Criminal Court. Millions of Muslims in the Middle East and some African and Asian countries reacted violently to the outrageous decision of the International Criminal Court and set many churches and Christian schools on fire. In some Arab countries, brutal pogroms have been directed against Christians that led to the destruction of their homes, business places, and religious centers. It has been alleged that the Muslim police officers and military soldiers participated in the attacks and allowed the angry protesters to rape the so-called infidel women and massacre the unarmed Christian men. The Vatican is the first European country and religious institution to condemn the decision of the International Criminal Court and blamed the judge and his jury for stirring up religious strife and hatred worldwide. The Pope delivered a brief speech in which he condemned the decision and considered Islam a compatible religion like any other major religion in the world. He further said that Islam, like any major religion, has its good and bad side, dark and white history, and good and bad leaders and followers. The Pope concluded his speech by encouraging Christians and Muslims to disregard the biased decision of the International Criminal Court. He requested Muslims to treat their Christian fellow citizens as their brothers and sisters in humanity. Chapter 56. Responses to the verdict of the ICC against the Islamic sacred texts. The first secular government in the West to welcome the decision of the International Criminal Court is Denmark. The government of Denmark promised to place those religious texts of Islam on the prohibited list of dangerous books. However, the government spokesman said the implementation of the International Criminal Court decision cannot be enforced soon due to precautionary measures given the fact that there is a substantial number of Muslim terrorists and radicals in Europe. The Netherlands appreciated the bold step of the International Criminal Court and promised to enact the decision of the ICC in the future for the same reasons. Other European countries preferred not to comment on the decision of the International Criminal Court. India is the first secular country among the non-Muslim countries to condemn the decision and considered it an unjustifiable attack and an infringement on the sanctity of one of the four major religions in the world, namely Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. All Central and Latin American countries preferred not to comment on the International Criminal Court decision. Likewise, all non-Muslim countries in Africa and Asia preferred not to comment on the verdict of the ICC. The United States of America said that the charges against the main sacred texts of Islam, the Quran, and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, and the decision of the International Criminal Court revealed that those Islamic sacred books are suffering from serious drawbacks and need to be subjected to revaluation and revision by some enlightened Muslim leaders as well as non-Muslim scholars. Islam today needs some modern thinkers and enlightened religious critics to reform it as happened to Christianity during the Reformation era in Europe. According to a spokeswoman of the White House, modern Muslim scholars must pay careful attention to the charges against their sacred texts and work out a major reformation of their religion. Canada and Mexico preferred not to comment on the decision of the International Criminal Court. Australia is the third country after Denmark and the Netherlands to adopt the decision of the International Criminal Court against the Quran and Hadiths. However, the Australian government thought the implementation of the verdict of the ICC may not be done soon. Israel also welcomed the decision of the International Criminal Court, but the Jewish Knesset considered it second to impossible to convince Muslim scholars and leaders to discard those terrorist verses of their Quran and misogynistic hadiths of their alleged prophet of God Muhammad. No Muslim, whether he is educated or enlightened or not, is going to admit that the Quran and the hadiths of the founder of Islam encourage violence against women and produce Muslim terrorists in the world. Therefore, the Israeli government believed that if those verses and hadiths are removed from the Islamic main texts, the religion of Islam would collapse. The scholars of the Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University have falsely claimed that all its 13 legal representatives hadn't been given enough time to defend the veracity of Islam and prove it to be the religion of peace and mercy. Worse than that, 11 of them were kicked out of the courtroom in Hague before the unfair trial against the sacred Islamic texts was over. Accordingly, the rector of the Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University, who is the Mufti of Egypt, has determined to lodge a complaint to the United Nations headquarters in Geneva against the biased decision of the ICC on the Holy Quran and Hadiths of the infallible Prophet of God, Muhammad, may the prayers and peace of Allah be upon him. Moreover, the greatest religious authority in Egypt has decided to appeal the verdict at the ICC in the Netherlands and demand a second fair trial in Hague. Such a decision for the appeal has been supported by almost all Muslim countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia except Iran and Turkey. Over 1 billion Muslims in the world signed a collective condemnation through the internet against the decision of the ICC on the heavenly inspired Islamic texts of the Holy Quran and blessed hadiths of the infallible messenger of the Almighty God. China, Russia, and other Asian countries remained silent regarding such a sensitive issue. All Muslim and Arab countries condemned the decision of the International Criminal Court. Turkey threatened to boycott any country that accepts such a blasphemous and provocative decision. Likewise, the Mufti and President of Iran issued a joint fatwa condemning the decision of the ICC. By then, the Dutch police investigation was able to unearth the entire details of the assassination plot and revealed it to the public from A to Z. According to the police report, the government of Iran had paid the Dutch policeman $50 million. Therefore, he agreed to kill the blasphemous and apostate Sudanese woman Dr. Ibtihal. The Dutch police officer agreed to carry out the plot if the government of Iran deposits the promised amount in the account of his girlfriend in a Swiss bank. The money was truly deposited in his girlfriend's account a couple of days before the assassination. His girlfriend is an extremely beautiful Iranian immigrant living in the Netherlands. The pretty Persian girl got arrested on the third day in Switzerland after the assassination plot. She had been immediately flown to the Netherlands to face the charge of conspiring with a Muslim terrorist group. Then the government of Switzerland requested the bank to freeze the account of the assassin's girlfriend. The Dutch police were able to make many arrests of Iranian terrorists in Hague. Some of those detained terrorists were interrogated and confessed how the assassination plot of the Muslim apostate girl had been masterminded. They admitted that they approached the Christian Dutch police officer through his Muslim Iranian girlfriend and convinced him to carry out the assassination. The government of Iran agreed to pay him the bounty in advance. A week prior to the plot, the assassin's Persian girlfriend, along with their son, left the Netherlands and traveled to Switzerland. The Iranian terrorists warned the police officer that his girlfriend and his son would be murdered if he tried to cheat the government of Tehran. The police officer expected that after the assassination he would be arrested, tried, condemned, and imprisoned for a few years and then released. He knew that there is no capital punishment in the Netherlands. The government of Iran promised to harbor him and his family in the future. He did not expect to be shot and killed by his police colleagues.